CFTO TV Channel 9 in Toronto.
In tonight's news, arm twisting for peace.
It's going to be much tougher than anybody expects.
American pressure on the Middle East draws protests. Getting Ottawa's attention.
We're down here to cause as much noise and get somebody listening to us.
A march for jobs in hard-luck Cape Breton. And rocketing to a Grey Cup. The rocket takes off in Winnipeg and lights up Toronto's Yonge Street.
CTV News with Sandy Ronaldo.
Good evening. The Middle East peace talks are scheduled to begin again in 10 days, but already trouble is brewing. The problem is the location. Israel has asked the White House to reconsider its choice of Washington. So far, only Jordan has accepted the invitation to the second round of talks. The Palestinians have agreed in principle, but Israel, Syria, and Lebanon have indicated they won't meet tomorrow's deadline for responding. CTV's Martin Himmel has more.
The Bush administration is insisting the Israeli government and the local Palestinian leadership agree to attend talks in Washington on December 4th. Both sides don't like the American arm twisting. Bush is demanding an answer from Israel's Prime Minister Shamir within 24 hours. The Israelis reject what they call this American ultimatum. Shamir will probably not give his answer before Wednesday. On his return from talks with the U.S. president, Shamir said the negotiations should be held in the Middle East, in the arena of the conflict.
Well, that we prefer to have the negotiations in the area and or near to the area. It will be better from all points of view. And Washington is far away.
The Palestinian delegates don't like the U.S. pressure either. They don't want Washington as a venue because the United States will not allow their PLO colleagues to enter the country. The Americans still consider the PLO a terrorist organization.
They should ease down some of the restrictions for the PLO possibilities to be in the United States.
Even if all sides finally agree on a venue for talks, there are still many negotiating obstacles. The Palestinians, for example, say they will demand an immediate freeze in Jewish settlement construction in the occupied territories. Israel says the territories will never be given up, therefore it sees no reason to stop building more settlements. What all sides do agree on is that future talks are going to be very tough.
I think it's going to be difficult, it's going to be tough, and it's going to be much tougher than anybody expects.
The Israelis and Palestinians are hemming and hawing, but political observers believe that all sides will be at the negotiating table in Washington on December 4th. The United States is giving them no other option but to talk. Martin Himmel, CTV News, Jerusalem.
Yugoslavia's 14th ceasefire went into effect today, but sporadic fighting continued in the breakaway Republic of Croatia. Still, the latest truce is different. This one was brokered by the United Nations, and if it proves successful, UN officials say arrangements for a peacekeeping force could be worked out within a week. But Croatia's president has accused the federal army of launching a final offensive to capture more territory before a UN force arrives. And a key target could be the city of Osijek. Kate 80 of the BBC reports.
At first light, the town seemed to be quiet after a night of heavy shelling, which left several injured. This morning, a few people ventured out. Most, though, preferred to stay underground, like these people who've lived for weeks in a shopping arcade beneath the town centre. Above them is a substantial town where most buildings show damage. For the past 5 days, shelling has been continuous. But initially this morning, it looked as if a ceasefire might be working. However, as we toured the town, we could hear shelling in the distance, in the direction of one of the villages where Croatians have been facing the Yugoslav army. As we went nearer to what is an uneven battle line, the Croatian fighters insisted that all the activity was coming from the army and from Serbian irregulars. They said they were not firing. They insisted that they wanted a ceasefire, but there was considerable cynicism about the possibility that it would hold.
Primjer je onda potpisuje Milošević da gruvaju ovi jači po nama. He said in the same time they're signing agreements. They probably get orders from Milosevic to fire on us even more.
And as the day wore on, the crash of shells and rockets began to come from other directions. Back in Osijek, Mass should have been celebrated in the Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul, with its crumpled stained glass and rubble. Instead, with the sound of explosions in the distance, a small group who'd ventured out retreated to the crypt to pray for peace. Kate Adie, BBC News, Osijek.
The Canadian Embassy in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, is surrounded by police and soldiers in combat gear after the radicals inside smashed their way into the main part of the building. The 16 men and 3 women have released a pamphlet that says the Canadian and U.S. embassies should be burned down. It included the words, "Long live Gaddafi," "Long live Castro," "Long live Aristide." A spokesman for the island's deposed president denied any connection with the young Haitians, who are being called terrorists by Canadian Ambassador Bernard Dussault. The 19 moved into the embassy last Wednesday seeking asylum, but Canada maintains they have undesirable connections and is refusing the request. The man who's been called the forgotten hostage arrived home today. Ian Richter flew into London after 5.5 years as a prisoner in Iraq. The warmest greeting was from Richter's wife, Shirley. She was accompanied at the airport by Britain's Overseas Aid Minister, Linda Chalker. Later, at a news conference, Richter said his long months in captivity taught him to keep a tight rein on his emotions.
There have been a number of setbacks over the years. There have been lots of hopes, and I think one learns never to lift one's spirits too high because you fall down too hard. But, you know, the last 24 hours have been magic, and I wish they'd last forever.
Richter was punished for bribing an Iraqi official, a charge he always denied. Asked how he fared at the hands of his jailers, Richter admitted things hadn't been pleasant in the beginning, but recently he'd been treated well. He said now he wants only to look forward, not back. The Soviet Union's poorest republic, Tajikistan, held its first presidential election today. Results are expected tomorrow, but the race promises to be a showdown vote between hardline communists and a growing Islamic movement. Still to come in tonight's news, a makeover for the 90s.
Everybody inside, please.
Changing the face of liberalism.
We will be practical with a social conscience to move the country forward.
The search for affordable social policies. Also ahead, a protest march with historical echoes.
Where do we want them? No!
Looking for solutions as hard times keep getting harder. The Federal Liberal Party ended a weekend policy conference today with a promise to recession-weary Canadians. Jean Chrétien says the party can lead the country to prosperity in a global economy without sacrificing social programs. CTV's Ottawa Bureau Chief Craig Oliver has that story.
Everybody inside, please. À l'intérieur, s'il vous plaît.
At this 3-day intellectual forced march, Liberals and invited thinkers sought fresh policies to take the Liberal Party through the 90s. In summing up remarks, Jean Chrétien felt the need to reassure those who fear he's in pursuit of a less liberal, more small-c conservative agenda.
Protectionism is not left-wing. Protectionism is not right-wing. It is simply passive. Globalization is not left-wing. Globalization is not right-wing. It is simply a fact of life.
Chrétien told reporters afterwards that he'll follow whatever economic policy is necessary, but never sacrifice the social safety net.
We're not doctrinaire. We don't try to satisfy a slogan of the left or satisfy a slogan of the right. We will be practical with a social conscience to move the country forward.
Still, many of the new policies talked over by the Liberal Brain Trust made them sound at times like they were attending a conservative convention. Businessman MP Paul Martin says the similarity stops there.
Conservatives give good ideas a bad name. Now, there's the problem. They have not invested in R&D, they have not invested in education, and they have effectively said that you can solve the deficit at the same, by simply leaving people in poverty.
Whether they needed it or not, Liberals also got a dose of reality on the final day. Pollster Michael Adams warned that while the Prime Minister was setting record lows in popularity, Jean Chrétien wasn't overwhelmingly popular either, and he cautioned Chrétien not to let backroom boys from the past sideline new policies.
One of the things you must avoid is allowing your party to be taken over by cronies and pollsters and ad men who create your party platform. You have to create that yourself.
Its organizers believe this conference has given Jean Chrétien the opportunity to move his party into new and more innovative economic policy areas than simple opposition to the free trade agreement and GST. They concede, however, that the question is whether Chrétien can grasp those concepts and articulate them in a way that will resonate with Canadians. Craig Oliver, CTV News, Aylmer, Quebec.
In one small corner of Canada, recession and chronic unemployment have become a way of life. Cape Breton Island's economy has been stagnant for more than 20 years, and the future holds little promise of a turnaround. Today, hundreds of islanders paraded through the streets of Sydney in a march of concern. It recalled a similar rally nearly 25 years ago when people demanded a government takeover of the Sydney Steel Company, then the island's biggest employer. Since that time, federal and provincial governments have poured more than $1 billion into the steelmaker, but it continues to lose money. And as Randy McDonald tells us, it symbolizes the growing economic crisis on the Cape.
The people of this hard-luck island are no strangers to tough times. But with jobless rates as high as 40% and climbing in some communities, it seems those tough times have gone from bad to bleak to worse.
Things just seem to be getting worse because there's a lot of places closing down.
More people in unemployment. Same every year.
In Sydney, the rusting and now unused smokestacks of the downsized steel plant still dominate the horizon. Sydney Steel Corporation once employed more than 4,000 people in this small city. Today, just 500 work here, and even those remaining jobs are threatened. Jane Crawley's husband is facing a layoff at the steel plant.
I think there's a lot of fear and panic and depression in this area, a lot of poverty, and it's only getting worse. So you can imagine what that makes us feel like.
Government attempts to diversify Cape Breton's economy have been disastrous. The Northside Industrial Park near Sydney has been a financial black hole for taxpayers' money. Federal and provincial governments spent almost $100 million to create new industries in the area. Almost all of the companies have failed. Several have also been investigated for fraud. Dan White is president of the Cape Breton Board of Trade, the economic equivalent of a cheerleader for a home team that just can't seem to win. White says Cape Bretoners can no longer count on government interventions.
We're not stupid. We know that. A lot of other areas of Canada are only now waking up to that fact. Without the interventions, there are few alternatives. You either create a job for yourself, happily find a job within the few industries that have a future here, or you march on.
The remaining jobs at Sydney Steel have become symbols of the region's economic survival. But even some Cape Bretoners say it's time to break the reliance on government-funded big industry once and for all. Jerry Smith and Blair Riley have formed a group called Industrial Cape Breton Tomorrow. The former steelworkers spent more than 30 years between them at the steel plant before losing their jobs. These islanders are skeptical of outside plans to save Cape Breton, of what they call white knights charging across the causeway that links Cape Breton Island with the rest of the country.
We'd like the chance to do something with local people for a change.
We don't want no more white knights. We want to start it over ourselves and do it right this time.
Randy McDonald, CTV News, Sydney.
Coming up, Spy in the Sky. Night liftoff for the Shuttle Atlantis. 6 astronauts go aloft and one's a spy. Also ahead, playing astronaut.
This is the space station speaking to you.
A new place to learn what space flight's really like. The Space Shuttle Atlantis is in orbit at this hour after a flawless liftoff from Cape Canaveral. The rare nighttime launch carried 6 crew members and a military spy satellite aloft. The flight was delayed for 5 days due to a steering malfunction in the satellite booster, but a new one was installed and has tested perfectly. As ABC's Jim Slade reports, the crew will be doing a bit of spying of its own.
This final flight of the year is an unclassified military mission with interesting political overtones. The chief payload is a $300 million missile warning satellite that'll replace an old one now on station over the Indian Ocean. The Defense Department has been using these secretly since the early 70s. During the recent Gulf War, 3 of them kept track of Iraqi Scud launches, giving Patriot anti-missile crews enough warning to shoot them down. And during their 10 days in orbit, the crew will conduct more than 30 tests of their ability to see and identify military maneuvers or objects on the ground. Until recently, the Pentagon expressed very little interest in what astronauts could add to military operations. On this flight, they'll be testing the concept every day. Jim Slade, ABC News, the Kennedy Space Center.
The launch of the Space Shuttle Atlantis was watched with particular interest in Edmonton. The city has just opened a new learning center where young people can study the science of spaceflight. And the money for the project was donated by the families of the 7 astronauts who were killed when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in flight 5 years ago. John Loveland has that story.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
From the ashes of America's worst space disaster comes a step forward for science in Canada. This is the $600,000 Challenger Learning Center at the Edmonton Space and Science Center. The space station simulator is a living memorial established by the families of the 7 dead Challenger astronauts.
They decided that the educational mission that they were on should continue, and they came up with this concept of Challenger Learning Centers. Welcome to Space Station Alpha 7. All right.
Space Station Alpha 7 is the first Challenger Learning Center outside the United States. Students embark on a mission to rendezvous with Halley's Comet.
Test meteoroids for magnetism.
But the journey is more than a scientific expedition. It's a lesson in communication.
This is the space station speaking to you, 20 million kilometers from Earth. Do you read me? Over.
A lesson in teamwork.
Together we had to put together the right little boxes on the probe and connect the wires correctly or it wouldn't work. So we both had to do that together.
And a lesson in group problem solving.
Capcom to Simcom.
The mission controllers will provide information, advice, help, and they'll also record all the data that they send back from the experiments here.
Not enough young people in Canada are pursuing careers in science. The Challenger Learning Center hopes to put the fun back in science and continue the educational mission of the Challenger astronauts. John Loveland, CTV News, Edmonton.
And when we return, Grey Cup triumph. Toronto, Winnipeg, and the Canadian Football League feel good about themselves. Well, there were skeptics across the country who said it was madness to stage the Grey Cup in Winnipeg's November climate. But the fan support was there, and the Toronto Argonauts were hot in spite of the freezing temperatures. The final score in the game was Toronto 36, Calgary 21. The long-term impact on the popularity of the Canadian Football League remains to be tallied. Dana Lewis reports.
There were 2 records set in Winnipeg.
This time he's gone!
The Rockets, an 87-yard kickoff return, and the Weatherman, a bone-chilling -18 game-time temperature. The coldest Grey Cup in 65 years, even though no one wanted to admit they were cold.
You buy $500 suit, honey? You're going to be warm.
And Winnipeg's first Grey Cup was one of the CFL's most successful ever. 52,000 football fans bundled in blankets, fighting frozen toes and beer, and even a trumpet or two.
You can't beat an outdoor football game. That's football in Canada.
Staying warm? Yeah, we're fine. A little cold. Should it be under the dome, or you like it out here in Winnipeg? A win's a win.
It was the Argos' 12th Grey Cup win, one that flooded the stadium field here with fans. It also filled the bars and streets of Toronto. Bruce McNall, the new owner of the Argos, paid dearly for this embrace, $4 million a year for the Rocket alone. And while the Grey Cup was fun, he hopes winning it will help launch a league expansion into the U.S.
We have to build up from this right here. We have to continue looking at other possible teams. We have to look at what else we can do to market this league and get more television exposure, get more fans out. I think we just start right now.
And despite the sad faces in the Stampeders dressing room, their new owner managed to smile for having made it this far. The Stampeders and the Argos believing they have turned their club's fortunes around, wishing this spectacular Grey Cup might brighten the image of the whole Canadian Football League. Dana Lewis, CTV News, Winnipeg.
And that's the news this Sunday evening. On Canada AM tomorrow morning, Liberal leader Jean Chrétien talks about the shape of things to come, and there'll be a preview of the new Rolling Stones concert film. Here at CTV News, we will be watching events at the Canadian Embassy in Haiti, and we'll have a special report on one of the great success stories of Canadian education.
Par exemple, tu peux lire et écrire des autres langues.
French immersion, but something's happened and the bloom is fading.
Interest has declined in pretty well all provinces except Manitoba at the present time. It has plateaued in many of our provinces.
A focus report on CTV News tomorrow. And Lloyd Robertson will be back here tomorrow evening. I'm Sandy Ronaldo. For all of us here at CTV News who worked this weekend, thank you for joining us. Good night, and we'll see you soon.